This is frontispiece gallery. Frontispiece is a play on the word frontispiece, which is like the first page of a book, and seeing this is the entranceway to the art and music library. That's a pun, I guess. But what's lovely about this space is it's so highly visible for most of the student body will walk past this. So the shows that are in here really have a really strong impact and gives us some chances to bring in some curator, or guest curators, which in this case is, where's Michael? Michael's the guest curator of this space now. And then we do a rotating group of shows throughout in this space. So here this year we've had, we gave an opportunity for one of our adjunct professors to show in this space. We gave a recent MFA named Sojung Kang recently got her MFA from RIT. She had her first solo show in this space. The previous show was a drag queen, Miss Kasha Davis, who never had an art show before, but we were able to bring Miss Kasha Davis's work in here and present it as a drag, as art form. And now we've got Michael, and we'll also be having some senior shows in here as well. So this is the one that I was referring to. This is more like local and regional artists. But I would do a bad job describing this show, so I'll leave that up to Michael.
All right, yeah. So when I made the selections of the art and artists, I wanted to focus on the Seneca people of Genesee, and then it dawned on me actually when I was writing some of the text for it that they are all from the Heron clan. Seneca people are organized into 8 clans, and there's the turtle, wolf, beaver, bear, heron, hawk, snipe, and deer. And you inherit your clan from your mother, and so it was just by coincidence that all the artists were Herons, and I thought that's a great launching point for the exhibition for Herons. This is the first exhibition of Indigenous art at the University of Rochester, I had a great time putting it together and this little intimate space. So thank you all for coming. We have our own ways of doing things, languages, ceremonies, cosmologies, right? But we are also living an American experience just like everyone else. And so when there are artists among our people, who kind of want to show their work, and if it's not recognized as Indian art, it doesn't get shown as Indian art, And so that's kind of what I'm trying to complicate here. So we have 4 artists that I selected from the Genesee River Basin. One, Ernest Smith, who's no longer around, worked here in Rochester at the Rochester Municipal Museum during the WPA era project known as the Indian Arts Project. And he did work in the 1930s, literally an hourly rate to produce paintings. He was specifically asked to inform Seneca folklore traditions and storytelling traditions, but then he branched out into portraiture and was a working artist until the day he passed in the 1970s. And so some of his work here is sort of illustrative in the way that it kind of helps tell a rich story of Seneca tradition. He initially started out working in oil, but oils were an expensive commodity in the 30s, and so the director of the museum, also a Seneca named Arthur Parker, convinced him to try watercolor and gouache, and that's what he kind of continued to do until he learned about acrylics in the 60s. And so the work here is like, there's a charm to it, right? And definitely this illustrative quality. But there's such a like sensitivity to me, and if you look at his work over a longer period of time, you see he's at times really focuses on portraiture. So like the seated woman there, so that's a real woman that sat for him, Seneca woman, and she's wearing clothing that was also produced during that era in the 1930s, Seneca traditional clothing. And they were both part of that WPA project. And so we know the dress, it sits in the museum. We know the skirt, the moccasins, the baskets that she made. We know because it was such a well-documented project. And I think then he did that kind of work, and then he was kind of just doing work to get it out there. You know, you could feel it's a little rushed, looks a little unfinished. But anyways, this is kind of a cross section of his work, and I just think there's charm to it. They're almost like some of these early ones on the right hand side are almost like film cells for an animated, production. They could be even turned into that, But yeah, so Ernie is not well known outside of indigenous art circles. The museum currently holds something like 200 or so of his works. Many of them are not they're culturally sensitive, so they can't be exhibited. So they represent certain ceremonial contexts and events in Seneca culture, which people no longer are willing to exhibit anymore. But you can see this. It was a nice cross section. So the work behind you, the Golden Hearts, is by a young woman I've known since she was a teenager. Moved to the Rochester area in her teenage years, and is trained as a art therapist. And I was hoping that she'd be here to tell me more about her work, but but I will tell you this, that a lot of her work is very personal, and as you might expect from an art therapist. But I've been really trying to encourage her to do more public-facing work. I think it's worthy, and not only did I select her for this exhibition, but I selected her for an exhibition at the Seneca Art and Culture Center. She has a watercolor piece there, which I am just in love with, and so you can see more of her work at Ganondagan. The work behind you, this wall, is being shared by two artists. So the smaller pieces are by G. Peter Jemison, a well-known Seneca artist who is my predecessor as director. And Peter has been a working artist, his entire life, but he was trained in Italy and worked in New York and San Francisco, and then came back to Seneca communities to run some arts programs, and eventually wound up at Ganondagan. And so these are some early pieces that people have not seen before. They haven't been exhibited before. Some real early, very sketchy, sketch-ish in a way, and moving in directions that, I would say wound up dead ends for him, actually. And that's how art works, you just don't always, you're not always feeling what's happening. You just keep producing. So these are our works from his early days at Ganondagan. Peter, too, I think is connected to Ernie because he also is, his work can be considered illustrative in a way of Seneca cultural themes and stories. But he's most well known for his paper bags. So when he was working in New York City, everyone on the subway had paper bags with those handles, And he thought, this would be a great way to kind of show my work is paint on these bags. And so he's done bags as long as I've known him, which is 33 years, even though he would admit that he's trying to escape the bags. But the museums won't let him, He's had some really excellent museums collect his work of recent. So he's got, let's see, MoMA, the Met, Tate Modern, AKG.
AKG just purchased a piece, yeah?
Yeah. So, he's kind of seeing like a rekindling of his art career now is in his retirement, which is great. But these are really interesting, I think. If you knew his work, you might not recognize them even. Right? Maybe the one on the left here is the most recognizable, the dog and the longhouses, but you may not recognize the others.
Can you speak to the symbolism of the cross, the sword, and the corn in this piece?
Yeah. So, Ganondagan, where Peter was the founding director, is the site of a Seneca town, which is down in Victor, New York. And it was, people lived there from the mid-17th century till 1687. And we know that people left in July of 1687. There was a well-documented attack by the French. And their intent really was to wipe out the Senecas, basically. Seneca people were interfering with their economic interests in the Western Great Lakes and represented a bulwark towards that ambition, and so they launched an army and invasion. And so